Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
So glad you're with us for the Monday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We've got good, bad, and crazy martinis for you as usual. And Jim and I will not bore you with our moaning from yesterday, but it's a good lesson for political losers like Bob Casey. Even if you lose close ones, you still lost. We're moving on. You can move on too.
Greg, the Jets can still have a successful season, and Aaron Rodgers can still bring them to the Super Bowl to take on your Chicago Bears if Mike Pence has the courage to do what's right. There are alternate electors, alternate referees who will... Yeah.
That's right. It's going to take a lot of courage.
Yeah, there was no football this season. It was canceled. It was canceled way back there. Yeah.
Well, anyway, let's get on to our good martini. And as it was, I think, late at the end of last week, it's infighting among Democrats. And public infighting, of course, is our favorite type of Democratic infighting. Nancy Pelosi went on a podcast with the New York Times and tried to radically rewrite her role and shift the blame for Kamala Harris losing the 2024 presidential election. Of course, Pelosi was the leader of the band in shoving Joe Biden out of the race following his disastrous debate performance at the end of June. Took him 3 weeks. According to Mark Halperin's tweet, the morning Biden announced he wasn't going to run again, that she was going to have to ratchet up the pain. We still don't know what that means, but pain was ratcheted up because Biden got out that day. And then, of course, endorsed Harris, which may have thrown a few people off. But nonetheless, here is what Pelosi had to say to the New York Times, and then we'll have John Fetterman's reaction to it.
Had the president gotten out sooner, there may have been other candidates in the race. The anticipation was that if the president were to step aside, that there would be an open primary. And as I say, Kamala may have, I think she would have done well in that and been stronger going forward. But we don't know that. That didn't happen. We live with what happened. And because the president endorsed Kamala Harris immediately, that really made it almost impossible to have a primary at that time. If it had been much earlier, it would have been different.
Pelosi was leading the charge in saying that everything was fine with Biden until June 27th. And I love the way that she phrases it so passively, as if, well, if the president decided to get out, if the president decided earlier, you were demonizing everyone before that who said he needed to go. But then John Fetterman, speaking to Politico, called Nancy Pelosi, first of all, the godmother, and suggests she is partially responsible for Trump's election win. He says, quote, she's the godmother, she's the enforcer, and now she's blaming Biden. Well, you can't have it both ways. You got what you wanted, and now you're still blaming Biden. I think it's really ironic that you have a woman at age 84 and she is still hanging on. Why not give a younger generation an opportunity to occupy that seat? So, Jim, again, infighting in general among the Democrats is fun to watch, but the fact that he's actually willing to publicly throw barbs at Nancy Pelosi when 99% of other Democrats refuse to go there because they fear their political career could be over in a moment if they do that, real good.
So I can understand some listeners once again saying, is this a rerun? How many consecutive days is the good martini going to be Democratic infighting? And the answer for those listeners is as many days as it takes. As many days as it keeps getting served up, we're going to enjoy it. When Greg suggested this topic, when we go back and forth on email over ideas for the show, I misquoted or deliberately adapted a quote from The Dark Knight, the Christopher Nolan movie, in which Harvey Dent says, you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. A very ironic quote considering what happens to Harvey Dent. Well, in the case of Nancy Pelosi, you either retire a hero or you stay in office long enough to see yourself become the villain. And of all the people who had a say in how the 2024 presidential election shook out, it's not that Nancy Pelosi had the single most control, but she had considerably more control than anybody else. That she effectively, we didn't hear, we knew Obama was not enamored, don't underestimate Joe's ability to F this up. We know there are other Democrats, but Pelosi apparently was the one who was out there both publicly and behind the scenes doing the arm twisting, pushing out Joe Biden. By the way, I think if Joe Biden had stayed in, he probably would have lost even worse than Harris did. So it's not like she was necessarily wrong on this. But the whole point, this whole idea of, the Democrats were so smart to hold one of the presidential debates really early so they could figure out that Joe was really in trouble and then push him out. The problem is we all knew that beforehand. We knew the president's schedule. We knew he was going to be like, it's not like his age suddenly changed. You know, he ages at the same rate, 1 day per day as the rest of us. I know it seems like more. I know it seems like he ages faster, but it's one of those things where this is completely predictable. So the idea of Pelosi jumping out there now and saying, you know, if only we'd had more time and if only we'd gotten him out earlier, you know, you would have had to get him out at the beginning of the year. You really would have had to have started this after the 2022 midterms. And as my colleague Ramesh Ponnuru and a bunch of other people have observed, the 2022 midterms ended up being the poison chalice for the Democrats. That if they'd gone badly, like, okay, thanks, Joe, it's great. It's time for us to have a primary, and it's time to, and possibly somebody not Kamala Harris could have been the Democratic nominee. They would not have been so directly tied to the administration's positions and the administration's record. And they would have had a better shot. Maybe there's nobody who could have beaten Donald Trump this particular cycle. But for Nancy Pelosi to jump out and say, you know, don't blame me, is kind of, it's richly ironic. Fetterman, you know, is whacking her around like a piñata, and he's, you know, she's definitely got it coming. I just want to point out, people are saying, wait, is something wrong with the show? You guys haven't talked about Bob Casey yet? In this same interview, John Fetterman said he doesn't think it's a big deal what they're doing in Bucks County and a couple of these other counties because the number of votes at stake is so small. It doesn't matter. You should not be counting votes that were not legally cast, no matter how it was, whether it's 2 or whether it's none. I'm still angry about the Chinese student who cast a ballot in Michigan. Good thing that didn't come down to 1 vote. So that's, I have to give a little bit of a rap on the knuckles on Fetterman for that one. But overall, you could argue this is a long-delayed fight that Democrats need to have. And there's no point in holding back now. And no, Nancy Pelosi, first of all, it's great irony that she, you know, we talked last week about Hakeem Jeffries getting the blame for the House defeat and not her. I think, you know, when they refer to her as the godmother, she may not be the speaker in title anymore, but she is effectively the leader of House Democrats. And she really hasn't conceded any behind-the-scenes power. And I think it has not worked well for them, and I think it's time that House Democrats probably deserve legitimate, new, real leadership instead of a kind of, you know, cosmetic change. Jeffries is technically the minority leader, but, you know, we know she's really calling the shots.
Nah, I think that's exactly right. So 2 follow-ups here. First of all, Jim, do you think the fact that she won't go away and is even promising to run again in 2026, is that her inability to give up the grips on power, or does she just love the stock tips?
Well, you like, you know, to quote Barack Obama, I think at some point you're rich enough. You don't need any more money. This is before Obama signed the book deals, the Netflix development deal, and every other, bought the Martha's Vineyard property and all that stuff. No, semi-seriously. First of all, can't you just be... Greg, I can't wait until Joe Biden comes out and says, you know, it's time for Nancy to move on. She's gotten too old. Because he can say that. And then secondly, just as kind of this recognition that, you know, we wonder, why did Ruth Bader Ginsburg hold on for so long? Why do all these people in office, you know, look, this sounds morbid, but a lot of people, like, it's their purpose in life. It's why they get up in the morning. They're charged up. They feel like their life has meaning. When people retire, and this doesn't just happen for people who are in their 80s, sometimes people retire in their 60s and they don't know what to do with themselves. I imagine it's probably that case for Pelosi and probably a lot of elderly people in Washington. Like, this is what they do. And if you took that away from them, they wouldn't know what to do with themselves. So they stay in the job long after being senile. Not just Biden, but, you know, Dianne Feinstein comes to mind. There's a lot of elderly lawmakers who are like, this is what they're hanging on for.
And also, in terms of Biden short-circuiting what they thought was going to be a sprint primary to the convention, first of all, if that's the case, I think it's absolutely hilarious that he kneecapped that and basically made it a coronation for Kamala Harris, who a lot of the Democrats knew was the weak candidate.
Yeah. All the primaries were in January, February, March. Like, when were you going to do this? Like, yeah, he dragged out the process, but like there was no time to organize a whole bunch of primaries within a 2-week period before the convention or something like that. Like, I
don't know what they had in mind, but clearly the Obamas thought there was going to be more than one candidate. And I think a lot of other people too, Schumer, maybe Pelosi as well. But somebody needs to write that story. Not that many have actually dug into the details of the 3 weeks between the debate and Biden pulling out. I think the week of Biden pulling out and him making that endorsement and throwing their other plans into a dither, I think would be a fascinating story if somebody actually writes it. But and finally, the last thing I'll say about Pennsylvania, amazing how Kamala Harris isn't saying anything about the Democrats basically cheating in Bucks County and other counties. If you want a fuller scope on that, read the Morning Jolt today. Josh Shapiro, not a word. Tim Walz, not a word. Nobody in Washington. Chuck Schumer, of course, was basically carrying Bob Casey's water. And so just amazing that they don't see any problems when it's their guy who's trying to bend or snap the rules in half. Anyway, let's talk about something way better than that. On Friday, Mrs. Columbus made the Omaha Steaks burgers, and they're just as good, if not better, than I remember them. These are really good-sized burgers. There's a ton of flavor. She, of course, does a great job of cooking them, and they come with the steak-cut fries. My daughter loves potatoes. She had 2 thumbs up, better than Siskel and Ebert on the fries, and so I love the burger. It fills you up, and it feels great, and Mrs. Columbus also loves the fact that it's real easy prep. So in addition to the fact that it's fantastic food, whether it's the steaks, whether it's the burgers, or anything else, it doesn't take long to prepare, and you get a top-notch meal. Right now, save 50% site-wide at omahasteaks.com, plus get an extra 30% off with the promo code 3ML and a $30 reward card when you shop early. Look, it's November 18th. You've got about a month and a week until Christmas. Take the guesswork out of so many people in your life. You know they're going to love the Omaha Steaks. Visit omahasteaks.com and save 50% off site-wide. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with the promo code, 3ML, and a $30 reward card when you shop early. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com and an extra $30 off with the promo code, 3ML. Minimum purchase may apply. All right, Jim, we just talked about Pennsylvania briefly. We talked about it a lot last week with this ongoing insanity in Bucks County and some of the other counties surrounding Philadelphia as the Democrats illegally claw for votes to try and get Bob Casey over the top. The number has diminished. His lead is now about 17,500 votes last I saw, but usually in a recount, that's even in a big state, that's not in danger. But we'll see what other legal chicanery Mark Elias and his gang of Democrats have in that particular race. But you also mentioned the illegal vote cast in Michigan by a non-U.S. citizen, but it's not the only place. CBS News in Minnesota with the story of an election official in Hubbard County, Minnesota.
New tonight, an election judge is in some serious trouble for letting Minnesotans vote illegally. Investigators say that the head election judge in Hubbard County allowed 11 unregistered voters to cast ballots on Election Day. Voters can register the day of the election, but this judge didn't make them fill out the paperwork. That judge is now charged with 2 felonies. The maximum penalty is 10 years in prison and up to $20,000 in fines.
So, Jim, again, it's 11 votes. Did it make a difference in Minnesota or even in the local races? Probably not. I don't really know what the local results are in Hubbard County, Minnesota. But the bottom line is that this is happening. You've got people, at least in this case and in others around the country, bending the rules, breaking the rules. And even in Minnesota, where there's same-day registration, there's literally a form you could hand them. Nah, just go ahead. Not good.
Yeah, and look, and whenever the topic comes up, almost always, certainly in every online conversation, it seems, and in a lot of offline conversations, some Democrat will insist this almost never happens. Well, almost never happens is not the same as never happens. And each person who is not voting legally is watering down your vote. Maybe not by a lot. It's probably necessarily just like if the question is, well, if it doesn't change the outcome of the election, should we turn a blind eye to it? And if you turn a blind eye to it, you get more of it. And at some point, you will get this in the range of number of illegally cast votes that will affect the outcome of an election. I wrote about this a little bit before Election Day. I went through all the recent really close elections. We had a House election in Iowa, came down to 6 votes. There was a particularly infamous Virginia State House election, came down to a perfect tie, and they picked a winner out of a hat. In circumstances like that, if somebody casts a ballot who's legally not eligible to cast a ballot, well, then you've got, the wrong person did win. So in this case, the fact that this is an election judge, there's a parallel tie to what we're seeing in Bucks County, Philadelphia County, and those 2 other counties, including Montgomery County, up in Pennsylvania. People who are running the elections who feel like, well, yeah, the law says this, but I really feel like you should go the other way, and thus deciding to do it. Now, it's bad enough when it's an elections county commissioner, and Bucks County should be getting rid of those folks who've said, well, I don't think the precedents mean anything anymore. But in this case, you're an election judge. This is your job. Insert the GIF here. You had one job, right? This is, you're like, you can't say, I didn't know. This is not poorly trained staff. This is not rogue low-level staffers in Cincinnati, as we've come to expect from the IRS. This is, it doesn't matter. Oh, these are 11 really swell people. Great. They have to register to vote. You don't get to waive that. You don't get to say, it doesn't matter. Yes, this stuff does matter. And when you don't pay attention to stuff like that, that's how you end up with a Chinese student voting in Michigan. Also in Minnesota, there was a person who just, her mother had passed away in August. She cast a ballot this fall because her mom really would have wanted to vote for Donald Trump. Now, I don't care if your mom really, really wanted to. Like, you have to be alive. You have to have a pulse. Otherwise, this is not Chicago. This is not The Walking Dead. The vote do not rise and cast ballots. This is, and we go through this every election cycle. Now, thankfully, it's on a fairly small scale. Those 11 votes would not determine the outcome. But you're still not supposed to do this stuff. And we keep being assured by Democrats saying, don't worry. Well, wait a second. These are the cases we're catching. Are there other cases out there that we aren't catching that are, and it's very tough to prove a negative. And I get that they, we're never going to know. Yeah. Why are you feeling so calm when you know we're never going to know? Anyway, so I'm glad they caught this. I'm glad this is going to get resolved, at least as far as we can tell. But it's really disturbing that an election judge just kind of decided that, I don't feel like we don't have to follow that law. You don't have to be registered to cast a ballot. Yes, you do.
Yes, you do. Simple laws that you have to follow. And I think there's a lot of states that should be watching what we're seeing in this election cycle and others and saying there are things we need to improve upon. I would end same-day voter registration. That would ungum up the process for a lot of this verification of whether people's ballots counts before you can count them. I mean, California, Jim, 2 weeks tomorrow. They're still got a lot of votes to count in a lot of these very close congressional races out there. 2 weeks later, completely unacceptable. There's a lot of steps you can take in order to streamline the process and secure the process. Look what Florida's done. Look what Georgia did a couple of years ago. I know they're Jim Crow 2.0 supposedly, but also a record black turnout and statewide turnout nonetheless. There are ways to do this right, and some states want to do it, and some states just don't.
We have this phenomenon where the state voting systems that are most denounced by Democrats, that we are told is the worst, absolute worst they could possibly have, everybody votes, the turnout's super high, and everybody seems really happy with it. Meanwhile, California, which I don't see any Democrat complaining about at all, it still hasn't counted all the votes 2 weeks later, and the whole thing is operating with the speed of a snail. The quality of a voting system is indirectly proportional to how much Democrats complain about it.
Maybe it's legalized weed. They're just really taking their time out there. I don't know.
Even Colorado got it done. There's no excuses.
Yes, that's a good point. That is a good point. All right. Well, if you're really frustrated about the fact that some states and some localities don't have their votes counted, or that one party is trying to steal a Senate seat in Pennsylvania, I can understand why you want to tip back one or two. But take Z-Biotics first, because I promise you, if you take Z-Biotics first, you're going to thank me in the morning because you feel a whole lot better than you would have otherwise.
Z-Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in your gut. And it's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next morning. Z-Biotics pre-alcohol produces an enzyme that breaks this byproduct down. So just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, as I'm sure you always do, and you'll feel your best the next morning.
As I've said many times, I got the colleague who knew his limits very, very well, stuck to them. All of a sudden, got older. Limits didn't work as well. Tried Z-Biotics, right back where he was. Feels great the next morning. Go to zbiotics.com/3ml to get 15% off your first order when you use 3ml at checkout. Z-Biotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantees, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Visit zbiotics.com/3ml and use the code 3ml at checkout for 15% off. Thank you, Z-Biotics, for sponsoring this episode and our good times. All right, Jim, on to our crazy martini now. And you could see this as a double-barreled crazy martini. Joe and Mika from Morning Joe. Joe Scarborough, long time ago, former Florida congressman, was part of the Gingrich Revolution, the Republican Revolution of 30 years ago now. But then after he left Congress, he got a job with MSNBC, and you know how that goes. He's tilted much further to the left. He's now married to Mika Brzezinski. And let's just say Morning Joe, after doing quite a bit of to promote Donald Trump, or at least give him a lot of airtime over the phone and otherwise during the 2016 campaign, especially during the primary season. They have demonized him quite a bit, attacked him for the most part, definitely bought into the return of fascism if Trump wins narrative that we got in the final weeks of the campaign from the Harris-Walz team and so forth. Some people were a little bit surprised when Joe and Mika, who are really based in Florida, don't be fooled by the screens behind them, decided to meet with Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago. And so the way that they almost had to apologize for wanting to speak as alleged news personalities with the incoming president of the United States should tell you something about how they approach this with their viewers, who are dwindling a lot, according to recent numbers. But nonetheless, here's how Mika put it this morning.
Over the past week, Joe and I have heard from so many people, from political leaders to regular citizens, deeply dismayed by several of President-elect Trump's cabinet selections, and they are scared. Last Thursday, we expressed our own concerns on this broadcast and even said we would appreciate the opportunity to speak with the president-elect himself. On Friday, we were given the opportunity to do just that. Joe and I went to Mar-a-Lago to meet personally with President-elect Trump. It was the first time we have seen him in 7 years.
And they say they talked about a lot of different issues. They disagreed strongly on a lot of issues. Surprise, surprise. But here's Mika basically apologizing again for speaking to the incoming president.
And for those asking why we would go speak to the president-elect during such fraught times, especially between us, I guess I would ask back, why wouldn't we?
And so you've got folks on the left, some just absolutely pulling their hair out. I don't know if this one's tongue-in-cheek from Ryan Grimm, but it says resistance commanders who went by the noms de guerre, Mika and Joe, have emerged from the underground and turn out to have been collaborating double agents from the beginning. It shockingly emerges one was a Republican congressman from Florida and the other the daughter of an imperialist icon named Zbigniew Brzezinski. We've all been played. Nothing between us and the wall now. I assume he's exaggerating there.
I think so.
But,
I think, yeah.
But there's a lot of people on the left who are not tongue-in-cheek on this, saying, how could you do this? He's made fun of your plastic surgery, and he's made terrible comments about Joe. And just like, these are people who realize that he's going to be the president for the next 4 years, so you might as well try something.
Greg, I'm going to utter the phrase, nothing too hard, Mika. And some listeners are going to say, aha, right? Because in the beginning of, really, we want to say 2016, but really in 2015, in the run-up to the Republican presidential primaries, whole bunch of mainstream media sources, and I would put Morning Joe front and center in this, loved Donald Trump. Yeah. They loved the ratings. They loved the fact that he was completely unpredictable. They loved the fact that he ripped into everybody else in the Republican field and said they stunk and they're all a bunch of losers, blah, blah, blah. And so they had him on a bunch of times. So, did they help him win the Republican presidential primary? Not single-handedly, but they certainly were part of a media ecosystem that loved giving Trump the spotlight. You probably also remember the CNN and the live coverage of the empty podium. We are waiting for Donald Trump to arrive. And why did the mainstream media, Les Moonves, who was head of CBS at that time, said, I don't know if Donald Trump is good for America, but boy, he's really good for CBS in terms of the ratings, in terms of advertising revenue and all that kind of stuff. Now, do you think all these people were suddenly MAGA? Do you think all these people, they did it because they thought Trump would be the easiest to beat for Hillary Clinton? As listeners probably noticed, it did not turn out that way. He was not, in fact, the easiest to beat, or maybe Hillary Clinton was just unelectable. But that's how this shook out. And then a good portion of the media, hashtag resistance. We're wearing our cat hats. We're wearing the pink ones and all that kind of, and they did that for the better part, as they just mentioned, didn't see him for 7 years. Now, here's the thing. If you are a journalist and you have the opportunity to interview the president, I think you should do it. If the president wants to meet off the record, it's less appealing, but I still think you take the meeting just because it's the president-elect of the United States. You never know what he's going to say. Even if the meeting's off the record and he says, I'm going to appoint so-and-so to this position, or I'm thinking of, he's going to make news. He's going to say things that you definitely want to have. Now, the problem is, if you've spent the better part of the last 7 years arguing that someone is literally Hitler, then you have a slightly tougher time of, we broke bread, we had a lovely time. And, now... I will now say I'm going to do something really unexpected. By the way, if you want to talk about reaction to things, every Monday I do Hugh Hewitt's program. I never know what we're going to talk about with Professor Hewitt. And so you never know when there's going to be a pop quiz on the Leaning Tower or the nuclear triad. But so I've always done very well in Professor Hewitt's classes at, 8 o'clock on a Monday morning, not knowing what he's going to ask about. But Dwayne Patterson was guest hosting today, and he discussed the Joe and Mika and Donald summit in Mar-a-Lago. And you don't usually see me utterly bewildered, but yes, the fact that Joe and Mika decided to break bread and have a nice time and everybody's getting along very well. Look, I will give them a couple molecules of credit. Mainstream media demonized Donald Trump every conceivable way for the last 8 years. Really, some would say 8 or 9 years. Many cases that criticism was justified. In a lot of other cases, it went over the top, and it was portraying this dystopian nightmare and all that stuff. Look, Trump won anyway. Trump won despite every conceivable criticism that they threw against him, including the kitchen sink, going out, all the indictments, all that kind of stuff. So if you're the media, you can either say, well, we're going to keep doing what we're doing and hope that now, after the election, the American people will listen. And now, or you can say, okay, we clearly did not persuade anyone of anything. And the American people, despite all of our arguments, said, yeah, we trust this guy. We want to give him another 4 years. So maybe it's good idea to wipe the slate clean. Maybe it's a good time to reset and say, all right, we're going to cover you. When we think you do a good job, we're going to say good job. When we think you're doing a bad job, we're going to do a bad job. This Elon Musk Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency, which is actually just an outside Blue Ribbon Commission. Remember Blue Ribbon Commissions? Remember, they're like, maybe they're going to come up with some good ideas. Maybe there's going to be parts, waste, fraud, and mismanagement in the federal government. It exists, right? So maybe they're going to spot some. Maybe some good can come out of this. And I think if you are left of center, that's probably the more productive response than to try to just do hashtag resistance and keep doing what you've been doing for the past 8 years, because it clearly did not get you where you wanted to go. It's
a decent strategy, but I assume they're going to revert back to where they've been the last 7 years, the second the deportations start and light their hair on fire. I don't see them. It will not last long, and I think that they will revert to type, but nonetheless, it's good for them to at least, if you said, no, this is, we still believe he is literally Hitler. We believe America has elected a genocidal dictator and we won't meet with them. Okay. At some point, why do you keep watching Morning Joe? In their eyes, America has ended. It's the end of the show. Roll credits. There's nothing left to say or do. So, welcome to the last Morning Joe. If candidate Garrity was accused of being a fascist and an authoritarian and dictator, if candidate Columbus had been accused of that, I'm not sure I'd been so magnanimous this quickly, but I don't know. But hold on. If Trump put out a statement talking about how great the meeting was, don't you think he loved it? Don't you think he loved the fact that even the people who hated me can't get enough of me? He is happier than a pig and you know what. And he's every right to be in light of those circumstances. Exactly right. He won. He's going to get most of his cabinet, if not all of it. He's got majorities in the House and Senate, and he knows he doesn't have to run again. So it's a pretty good position to be in. Jim, happy Monday. See you tomorrow. See you tomorrow, Greg. Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please be sure to subscribe if you don't already to the 3 Martini Lunch. Tell your friends about us as well. Thanks for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. They really do help us, so please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a great Monday. Join us again on Tuesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.